The MIT Sloan School of Management has always been a different kind of business school from the rest.
At MIT, we talk about addressing the world's biggest challenges, and that right there says it all for impact.
The Sloan central purpose is organizations are the path by which great ideas have an impact in the world.
We are in the business of helping people become better leaders, principled, innovative leaders who improve the world.
I have brilliant colleagues, but also colleagues who, at the core, are working to improve the world and to build something for real.
But so every person and every colleague that I have at MIT, I think our business is to try to make the world a much better place.
Today's world, you see a tremendous amount of alienation, of class separation. But one thing everybody agrees on is entrepreneurship is a great thing.
Bill Olet, in many ways, is the example, from central casting of the entrepreneur turned catalyst. He likes creating the conditions so that others can learn. And he has been an extraordinarily successful leader of the Martin Trust Center.
It's my firm belief that studying sustainability is perfectly suited for a school of management.
For years, John has been basically driving home this idea of how it's all a systems and we have to view the world through a systems lens. Here's someone who is absolutely at the top of his game as a scholar, and yet is completely committed to translating that scholarship into change in the real world.
What I'm really interested and excited by is to figure out how to use insights from finance and financial tools to improve the world.
Antoinette has this knack of finding problems and data that lead to pay dirt, that lead to something that has much broader implications. And when she digs into a problem, she often goes 1 or 2 layers deeper than other people have, and she finds out things that other people have missed.
Taking care of complex systems is almost like taking care of a human. You need to really understand the underlying mechanism of the current problem in order to really fix it.
We worked with a number of groups, failed multiple times, and then came across Retsev and his team. This work has had an enormous impact on the lives of thousands of patients. Partnering with Retsev and folks at Sloan has been so enormously helpful to us. Not only understanding the science of operations management, but actually making it happen in an organization that is made up of people.
At Sloan, we often like to say a better world is our business. That has a lot of implications, and I think this is a very profound statement.
It's a great idea that's turned into a great action that makes the world a better place.
The questions that are incredibly ambitious, that are incredibly impactful to humankind.
How we engage with that outside world, business leaders, policymakers in every kind of organization.
Using capitalism, which is the most powerful force the world's ever seen, to be able to take and make the world a better place.
And so if we can contribute to that, if we can have impact with our ideas, that's the ultimate reward.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome. My name is Dave Schmidtlein. I'm grateful for your coming out and participating in this gathering. The video that you just saw gave you a glimpse into the stories that unfold at the MIT Sloan School every day. You heard some of the leaders in the MIT Sloan community talk about the work they're doing toward solutions to some of the world's most important challenges. You also heard some of the people from the wider world who are grateful for and amazed by the work of some of these faculty. At MIT, inventing the future is our job. We create new ways of seeing. We see new ways of making. We educate and inspire amazing students. And we are inspired and educated by them. We're a mission-driven organization. Principled, innovative leaders who improve the world isn't the slogan if you internalize it and live it. And we have students and staff and faculty and alumni who do just that. And I'm very proud of all of them. When we talk at MIT about ideas that are made to matter, we're serious about that. When you heard on the video, "A better world is our business," it can sound like a slogan, but it isn't to the people at MIT. And it needs not just to be a slogan for the world right now. A better world has to be a focus of the School of Management from MIT. This is a time of change, challenge, choices. The way that basic science and drug discovery is going to be funded in the future has to be different. Who's going to invent the ways that private and public sector come together? Outmoded systems of transportation and healthcare need to be reinvented, and not only reinvented by brilliant minds, but the mechanisms to change from an old system to new complex systems have to come with them. When we look at the need for sustainable business practices and a healthy planet, we know that the solutions are not only going to come from the public sector. We have to find ways to help thoughtful leaders from the public and the private sector create those kinds of outcomes. Financial systems need to be both more efficient and also more resilient. And we need the kind of leaders who will take on those challenges. Because I would suggest to you that the world needs better modern finance, not less modern finance. You all know that cybersecurity and digital resilience is extraordinarily important and is a point of anxiety. And we know that computer science and engineering are part of what's needed, but not the whole. People are an important part of that kind of resiliency as well, and so understanding how people interact with technology is an important part of the solutions that we need. So we know these things are needed. I want to tell you they are coming in these particular areas and in many beyond. And MIT's Sloan School is in the middle of this activity. It has been effective, it is energetic, and I think it is what the world needs, and it is, I think, worthy of support. The video that you saw focuses on faculty. This is not only an evening and a set of stories about faculty. I mentioned students and staff, and I'll come back to those themes, but this is also a story of alumni. That means you. In 10 years as dean, I haven't gotten to know all of you. Some of you this evening, I don't yet know. But I have worked with thousands of you, and I have gotten to know hundreds of you relatively well. And as I have, the distinctiveness of this alumni community is something that you can't miss. And it is a distinctiveness that, sure, starts with smart, but not only chess playing smart, not just being smarter than the next person, but inventive, smart and inventive. These are people who are grounded deeply in ideas and purpose, but also open to new ways to achieve those purposes. And above all, for the alumni that I've met, person to person, they're not people who were at MIT. They're people who are of MIT. And it's hugely different. Alumni of other schools feel perhaps grateful for a benefit that they achieved through a transactional experience. When I meet MIT alumni, it isn't about the opportunity that you were given, although you were given opportunities. It is about what you became and what piece of MIT you continue to carry with you. I've heard that over and over from MIT alums. The definition of who you are is changed by having been exposed to MIT and to what you see that experience representing. Now, for a little bit, I'd like to turn back to the faculty. By the way, I'm proud of you. You are an amazing alumni community. Turning back to the faculty, we have someone here this evening that many of you know. I'm so proud to be able to introduce him. He is a professor of finance. He is the director of MIT's Laboratory for Financial Engineering. He is a great finance professor and a great forward thinker about the way markets work. He's also someone who is an amazing, principled, innovative leader who's really changing the world. Would you please welcome Andrew Lo?
I'd like to thank Dave Schmidtlein for that very generous introduction, and thank all of you for coming out here on a Thursday evening to be with us. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here to tell you a little bit about the research that my colleagues and I have been doing, and to share with you the kind of vision that I think makes up this Better World campaign for Sloan. It's also a terrific honor to be here at the Royal Society of London. I don't know how many of you realize the incredible history that it represents this building. It was started in the 1600s, apparently, by Christopher Wren and other famous scientists back in the days where science wasn't called science, it was called natural philosophy, when the periodic table was earth, wind, and fire. And over the course of centuries, we've had figures like Isaac Newton. His Principia Mathematica was published through the Royal Society of London. So calculus started here. Charles Darwin, and most recently, Stephen Hawking. And now me. So no pressure. But what I want to talk to you about is my area of specialty, finance. That's not represented by the Royal Society, and probably for good reason, because Isaac Newton, while he was head of the Treasury, Chancellor of the Exchequer, he actually lost a fortune in the South Sea bubble investing. And so London ultimately became a financial center. How many of you here are in the investments in the financial industry here in London? So quite a few of you. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start by talking with you about an investment opportunity. The opportunity is a $200 million fund that I'd like to create. And this fund is going to have no payout for the first 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, this $200 million has a 95% chance of vanishing altogether. There's a 5% chance of any positive payout. How many of you would invest in this fund, by a show of hands? I got one investor, thank you. Appreciate that. I think I gave you an A in 15401. Now, usually when I present this to my first-year MBA students, I'll get a student raising his or her hand saying, Professor Lo, you didn't tell us, what do we get in the 5% chance that something does come out of this? Because for most people, when they hear that 95% of the time they lose all of their $200 million, the answer is, no thank you, not interested. It turns out that these numbers are the back of the envelope numbers for developing a single anti-cancer compound. It takes about 10 years for going through the various different phases of clinical trials. It takes $200 million in out-of-pocket costs to do those trials just for one compound. And in oncology, the chances of producing an anti-cancer drug is about 1 out of 20. It's 5%, pretty low. But in the unusual case where you do hit pay dirt, it turns out that a cancer drug is worth about $12.3 billion on the day of approval. So now that you know these numbers, how many of you would invest in this opportunity? A few more hands, but most of you would not, because obviously it's way too risky. For those of you who are in the quantitative investment field, let me help you by telling you that this particular investment has an expected rate of return of about 12% and a standard deviation of 423.5%. Nobody is interested in it, and this is the problem that we're facing today. Drug development has gotten more expensive, more complex, more financially risky, and investors are going to lower hanging fruit. Money is leaving the space and focusing on things like social media or fintech or other areas of technology. And it's having a real impact on patients. I came across this phenomenon in a very personal way several years ago when my mother was dealing with lung cancer. I was introduced to a very well-to-do biotech group based in Cambridge that was very successful, developing all sorts of new therapies for cancer, including lung cancer. And I had the great privilege of meeting with the chief scientific officer who brought along his CFO because he had never heard of me, but apparently his CFO did. So I was able to meet with the both of them. And I asked them what I thought was an innocent question. I asked them, does your source of financing have any influence on your scientific agenda? Because one of the drugs that they were working on was one that could possibly help my mother, and I was very keen to see that that drug get priority. And the chief scientific officer looked at me, shook his head ironically, turned to the CFO, and turned back to me and said, influence? Our financing drives our scientific agenda. And I was absolutely shocked by that response. Now, as an economist, I understand, you gotta pay for things. But as the son of a patient, I was absolutely outraged because what does stock market volatility, interest rates, and Fed policy have to do with whether you can cure cancer via angiogenesis therapy or immunotherapy? Nothing. But it drives their scientific agenda. Now, I'm not a biologist or a scientist in the life sciences, but shouldn't the science be driving the financing instead of the other way around? And it occurred to me at that point that finance can actually play a role because we deal with risk in finance all the time. We know how to manage it, we know how to measure it, and in particular, in the context like this, there's a very simple solution. Instead of focusing on one drug development project at a time, why not focus on a whole bunch of them all at the same time, like 150 of them? Because we know from portfolio theory that if you put them together, you actually can reduce the risk. Now, granted that if you want to put together 150 projects, it's going to require 150 times 200 million or $30 billion. Where are you going to get $30 billion? And as an economist, I have a very straightforward answer. The answer is, assume we have $30 billion. I'll come back to that in a minute. If we had $30 billion and 150 projects, the amazing thing is that the probability of at least 3 successes out of 150 trials that are statistically independent, each with a 5% probability of success, is 98%. In other words, there's a 98% chance of at least 3 successes out of 150 tries. And if you had 3 successes, what would your portfolio be worth then? Well, 3 times $12.3 billion, or $37 billion. And if you had a portfolio that, with 98% probability, would be worth $37 billion in 10 years, it turns out that you can actually finance the vast majority of that $30 billion by issuing bonds. What kind of bonds? Well, if you issued up to $37 billion of bonds, the default probability of those 10-year bonds would be 98%. And so what kind of debt rating would you get for that? Well, in today's market, single A, that's the historical default rate, a little bit less than 98%, so you're actually doing pretty well. And as of last week, at a yield of about 3% for 10-year single A rated bonds, you can raise $27 billion by debt, by issuing cancer bonds.
With 2%, not 98%. You said that the chance of default would be 98%.
That's right, I'm sorry. The probability of default is 1 minus that. Yes, thank you, 2%. That's right, thank you. Right. So this suggests that using the tools of financial engineering, we can actually finance the vast majority of these multiple shots on goal and get therapies to patients faster. And if you allow me to use all the other tricks of the financial trade, things like collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, and so on, I can do even better. Now, I know some of you are smiling and chuckling. Is that really a good idea? I mean, didn't those tools figure prominently in the financial crisis? And actually, I have to tell you that it was the financial crisis that started me thinking down this road. The financial crisis didn't happen because these tools didn't work. It happened because these tools worked way too well. These are incredibly powerful methods for raising large amounts of capital over short periods of time for dedicated purposes. Imagine if we did that and applied it to drug development. We use structured financial products to deal with the risks and the particular challenges that the industry is going through right now. So can you really do this? Well, the short answer is I have no idea. I'm not a drug developer or a biochemist. But with a number of collaborations, what we're seeing through Monte Carlo simulations of these business models is that, yes, it really seems like these methods can actually work. And a number of pilot projects have been launched over the last couple of years that seem to demonstrate that they actually are working now. And my sense is that within another 6 to 12 months, we might actually see the very first rated product, a rated debt instrument that's backed by biomedical portfolios. We'll see if that happens, but certainly it seems like we're down that path. Now, I know that this is a very touchy subject because to talk about rates of return and financing in the same breath as life and death issues like cancer may seem really objectionable and obscene to many people. My mother died of cancer, so I get it. But if we don't talk about rates of return, we're not going to be able to get the financing we need in order to deal with these kinds of issues. Finance doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. You can actually do well by doing good. And with your help, with your work and your inspiration, we can actually do it now. Thank you. So introducing the next speaker, I want to let you in on a little bit of a secret. Many of you think about the Sloan School as being the impressive place that it is because of the reputation and the research of the faculty. But the secret is that many of the faculty who come to Sloan, including me, we come because of you, because of the quality of the students. In fact, the very first research paper that I wrote on using these financial engineering methods to finance drug development, that was co-authored with a Sloan fellow, Chema Fernandez. And currently I'm working with a second-year MBA student on applying some of these methods to fusion energy to see whether or not we can actually finance some extraordinary societal challenges using these kinds of methods. So the quality of the students are really second to none. The students that we have at MIT, I consider them to be colleagues rather than students. And the single most important person responsible for the quality of the students that we have and the culture that we've created, I'd like to welcome to stage. Please join me in welcoming Rod Garcia.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Thank you, Tommaso. It's very good to see so many familiar faces here in the audience. First, I'd like to say that it's very humbling to be the voice for the student community. And I'll start by saying that MIT students are the best in the world. Thank you. Now, I'm saying that not because you want me to say that, but I'm saying that because it is true, and I really believe it. You are the reason why I am at MIT for nearly 30 years now, and why I hope to match my predecessor's 50-year run. And I'm only 20 years close. Exactly. So, I'd like to tell a story. When I was invited for dinner by one of our alumni, as I was having dinner with this alumnus, he told me that he kept his admission letter. Do any of you still have your admission letter? Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much. And one of the things that surprised me was that he also framed his admission letter. And so it was there, on the wall. And that was the moment that I realized for the first time that those admission letters are more than letters. For many, and for some of you, it is the start of a life-changing experience. And so tonight, I'd like to share with you some stories of two people, two graduates of the Sloan School, who embody the Sloan spirit. These are students who, despite challenging circumstances and unconventional backgrounds, have succeeded well in school, but also at work. And so let me start with the first story. I was giving a presentation about the MBA program at the Harvard Kennedy School. And at the end of the presentation, a gentleman came up to me and talked to me about applying to the Sloan School. He was a dynamic man. He was very polished, and he knew MIT, and he had friends at MIT, and he wanted to be at MIT. And he did apply, and eventually we did admit him. And while he was at school, he had approached me in the middle of the semester, asking if we could help him with his tuition. Luckily, we did have some money, and we were able to help him with paying for his tuition. And he did graduate and finish, and had worked in the oil and gas industry. And this January, I heard from him. He sent me an email, and he wanted to be directed to someone at MIT who can provide him with his transcript. Because last January, he was being appointed as the Minister of Development and Economic Development in the far eastern part of Russia. And it turned out that he is of Aleut background. We are Facebook friends, and I follow him every day. And he's doing a great job in Russia. This is an example of a student, now alumni, who's doing something good and someone who's making a difference. And recently, he sponsored the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program. And so this year, we had a group from Far East Russia who attended that program. And so he's really making a difference, and we're glad that we admitted him. The other story concerns a trip that I made to Israel several years ago, where I met my first Israeli Arab citizen. A very interesting person, comes from Haifa, from north of Israel. He's got 2 degrees from the top university in Israel, from Technion. He has a bachelor's in electrical engineering and then also a master's in electrical engineering. And he's someone we wanted to bring to MIT. In the middle of the semester, he came to see me again and asked if we could help him. And again, luckily, we had some money left, and we were able to provide some funding for him. And he did well at school. And one of the things that he did was he partnered with one of the students, Israeli students, and he sponsored the first Israeli high-tech tour of the West Bank. For him, technology was something that bridged the two cultures where he represents. And for many students who went to Israel for the first time, including our Israeli students, that was the first time for many of them to cross the border and go to the West Bank. And this is an example of a student who's making a difference to the lives of their classmates and to our lives, to ourselves as well. And I can tell you many more stories like this if we have time, and maybe later this evening. But there is a common thread among the students. It is what I call the indomitable Sloaney spirit. It's smart, driven, and truly kind-hearted. These are the people who will make a difference, and these are the people who make a better world their business. You and the generation that will follow you will invent the future that we all look forward to seeing. And that's something that I would like to see from the next generation of students. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's one last story that I'd like to share, and this is something more personal to me, and this happened several years ago on a wet and rainy day, just like this morning. I remember driving to the Sloan School on a Saturday in April, and I was pulling to a Memorial Drive and Wadsworth. You all remember that, right? Yeah. And the light turned red, and I stopped, and I turned to my right, and I saw a family of 4 having the picture taken in front of the old Sloan building, E52, which is now the Chang building. The first thing that came to mind was silly tourists, right? We see them. You see them here in London. But then I said to myself, how lucky I am to be part of MIT, because while other people can only dream to be part of MIT, I am already at MIT, and you are already also part of MIT, and together we can make a difference, in this world. And so that was something that was very, very meaningful to me. And so I'd like to thank, all of you this evening, you, the practical dreamers, the principled problem solvers, and the purposeful inventors who are making a difference in the world and making a change also as a force for good and a force for change. Well, thank you very much. And before I close, I just want to say, for those of you who have supported us in admissions and also, who have helped us with fellowships, let me quote Shakespeare: "I can no other answer make, but thanks and thanks and ever thanks to everyone." Thank you. And at this point, I'd like to bring Dave again. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rod.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Rod does many difficult things in life, in the world. I have to tell you, one of the hardest things for him is to ask people for money. I'm supposed to do it, though. I'm happy to do it. And I hope you heard from Rod as well, that we have students who are worthy of support. We do. And we have faculty who are worthy of support as well. We wanted to make this evening, briefly, an evening of stories rather than facts and figures. We know you're a data-driven group of people, but it is stories, hopefully, that touch you and that you'll take away and hold on to. I have one of students myself, if you'll give me just another minute or two, and then I'll close and we'll return to a reception. The story I'd like to offer to you is a story from a student's application to MIT. I was the student's advisor, and so I got to see her application. And with her permission, I'd like to share with you what she wrote in answer to the application question, why do you want to come to MIT? Here's what she wrote. The rooster flew across the classroom. It's the one my grandfather brought to school on the first day of first grade. He brought it in hopes that the teacher would let him stay, but he would not. My grandfather's father was a fighter in the war for Korea's independence, and the families of those individuals were banned from education. Fortunately, Korea achieved its independence just a couple of years later, and my grandfather was able to start first grade just a couple of years after his friends. Education meant the world to him, and he grew up to become a school teacher in that same small town, in that same small school. And his dream was that his son would go to the best university in Korea and do something worthwhile. That person's my father. Today he's a doctor in Seoul. My grandfather and father's dream for me, and mine most importantly for myself, is that I would go to the greatest university in the world and to use that education to improve the world. Help our dreams come true. From Rod, from me, from your own experiences, I hope you know those stories. There are thousands more that aren't so different. Each is unique, but they're not so different. Some of you would know the name of the journalist, Thomas Friedman, who came to campus a couple of years ago to spend a few days with students. And one of the things that they said to him stayed with him and became the headline for the piece that he wrote about that time. The thing the student said, the headline of his piece, was, "We are the people we've been waiting for." Optimism, but not over-optimism. A lack of cynicism and sarcasm, and a sense that if anyone's going to do it, it might as well be here, and it might as well be us. Those students need to have experiences around the world. That's expensive. They come from challenged backgrounds, many of them. That's expensive. The work that our faculty does, the impact-oriented work that you saw and heard about, that's not the kind of work you can do sitting on a beach, writing on a yellow pad of paper. The world has changed in what we need to offer it, and what we need to do in order to fulfill that purpose has also changed. When I became dean 10 years ago, I knew we needed to change and we needed to invest, including to invest more and better in relationships with alumni. We're not at the end of that path, I know that. But 10 years ago, I asked you to believe and to support the school as you hadn't before, and you did. And we were able to expand support for students and support for faculty. This is, though, another inflection point, and we have to ask you to substantially increase your support for MIT Sloan because of impact, because of purpose, I hope, because you think it's worthy. If you don't think our students are worthy of your support, then I have failed them. And I think I've failed you because you should see them that way. And if you don't see our faculty as worthy of your support, the same. You knew this evening was part of MIT's Campaign for a Better World, so you knew I was going to ask you for money, and you weren't wrong. This is the part where I'm doing that, so you want to put up your protective shields. But in all seriousness, I do know that you care about MIT. You wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't. And no one wants to ask you to do more than you can. But I will ask you this. Don't do less than you can. So, sometimes it might seem that when MIT says a better world is our business, as we say at the Sloan School, it can sound like a slogan. It isn't. I hope you see that it isn't. And I think that if you look in the faces of people at Sloan, you can see that.
To us,
A better world
is not a lofty vision.
It's not an improbable hope.
It's not a convenient platitude.
It's not even a charge to everyone.
Because then it's a charge to no one.
A better world is ours to make.
A better world is our business.
We know that the important problems today
are complex problems.
Complexity is our call to action.
We start with questions.
Dig in to find facts.
Build and rebuild.
Ideas made to matter.
In our solutions.
Prove that no problem is too big.
When we're working on it together.
The promise that we take with us.
Across borders, boundaries, and walls.
Is that we will stay curious.
And we will stay brave.
Driven by our conviction.
That fixing what's broken
and inventing what's better
isn't just possible.
It's inevitable.
We are the ones to do it.
Because impact is our bottom line.
Making a difference is in our DNA.
And though our burden of responsibility is great,
our ability to change the world
is greater.
Today and tomorrow.
A better world.
A better world.
A better world is our business.